So have you ever tried, or have you ever wanted something so bad, you wanted to get after something so bad, and then as soon as you started down that path, you were like, wait, this is hard, right? This is not what I expected. So I think about that when I think about my kids, right? So it took us a few years to have kids, and by the time my son came, I was so excited. Are there any parents here? Raise your hand. Parents, or any people who want to be parents? Some of the hands just went down. I don't know what just happened. But anyways, so we were so excited to have my little boy, and I wanted to do boy stuff with him. He's 6 years old, and he was perfect. And on Sunday, this perfect little boy decided it would be a great idea to take the slingshot that I thought it was a great idea to buy for him, and slingshot a rock through the biggest window of our house. That just happened. And in that moment, I was not remembering how bad I wanted to have a son. In that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, are we sure about all this? What's the refund policy? But I want to tell you another story. So since I was a little boy, I have been infatuated with flying airplanes. I have been infatuated with wanting to get up in the air. I was the kid that I could hardly pay attention. And if I heard an airplane overhead, I was looking up. And as I grew older and older, I just knew I had to get in the air somehow. I had to do this. I get married. We start businesses, and we're going, and my wife and I decide, okay, let's do this. I convince my wife is what I meant by that. And so I decide, okay, I'm going to do this. I book my introductory flight, okay? I am so excited. I go to the flight school. I put my name down. They talk to me about, I get introduced to my new instructor. His name's Kirk, that I now call Captain Kirk. Every time that I said Captain Kirk, he'd remind me that he wasn't a captain. Okay, Captain Kirk, that's fine. And so he talks to me about how much I want to fly, and that I've been thinking about this my entire life. And coming from Southern California, if you've never driven a car in Southern California, you don't drive very fast because you can't. There's so much traffic. And the idea of being in the sky and being absolutely free just drove me. And I was like, let's do this. So we do all the pre-flight stuff. I walk out with Captain Kirk. If you don't know this, the pilot sits in the left seat. The co-pilot sits in the right seat. So Captain Kirk sits me in the left seat, and I'm feeling really cool. Okay, we do all the pre-flight checks, make sure the plane is okay. And then we go, we start it up, we do a few more checks, things I have no idea about, and then he helps us taxi. It's called taxiing, which is so weird. But he gets us, in the plane to the end of the runway, and he gets us pointed perfectly down the end of this long runway. And he says, okay, Jarrett, you're going to put your left hand on the controls here on the yoke. Your right hand's going to go on power, okay, on the throttle. And he's sitting right here. And he's like, okay, when I say go, I want you to go full power. I'm like, all right, full power. Let's do this. It's like a race car, right? So, and isn't that a lesson, by the way? Full power. If you want to take off, go full power. Write that down. Okay, so he says go, and I go, boom, and here we are. This plane, I think, is going to take off like a jet. They don't take off like a jet. It kind of goes like this, and it takes off really slow, but then it starts speeding up, okay? And he had told me, okay, when I tell you, you're going to pull back. So we're going, okay, and he's calling out how fast we're going. I don't know where on earth the dial is of the speed. It doesn't look like a car speedometer, but I'm just looking out the window, and I'm excited. So he's like calling out the speed, and he says, rotate. I'm like, rotate? Rotate what? Does anybody know what that means? Does any of you know what that means? He said, pull back. I'm like, oh, pull back. That's what rotate means. Okay, I'm going to pull back. And then in an instant, we were airborne. And I was living my dream. Oh, it was so good. In this instant, you don't feel the runway anymore, which kind of feels like a road. And I mean, have you guys ever flown before? Yeah, of course you have. And we get up and we climb up to this practice area, and it is the most exhilarating feeling, and I'm living my dream. And then all of the sudden, okay, dun, 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 Have any of you ever been in a little plane? Like a little private plane? Some of you have. So for those of you who have not, they don't really fly like a big commercial jet. In fact, you pretty much feel everything. They're not really smooth. In fact, flying a little plane feels a little bit more like being in a boat in the water. Okay, sometimes it's smooth, but most of the time, you're feeling everything. The air is different temperatures and different pressures, and it's going in different directions. And all of a sudden, we're up there, and I am terrified. I am convinced that that's it, we're going down. We are going down. This is how it ends. With my dream, I'm going down. And so we're up there, and I can't move. I literally, like the wings will dip, the nose will come up or down, and you'll feel it, and I cannot move. It was the scaredest I have ever been in my life. And Captain Kirk looks over. Remember, our faces were like this. And then he was like, what? He's like, in the radio, he's like, Jarrett, are you okay? I'm like, He's like, and finally I muster out. I'm like, Kirk, are we okay? Like, are we going down? And, he chuckles a little bit, and he says something that has been a lesson for my entire life going forward. It has changed the trajectory of how I do almost everything. He looked at me calmly. He first says, my plane. And that means, take your hands off the controls, scaredy cat. Okay, his plane. And he says, Jarrett, you don't know what it looks like or feels like to be in an airplane having a problem. And he goes, look around. This is flying. He said, welcome to flying. And I was like, whew. I calmed down a little bit. And he said, do you remember when we were on the ground, how free you wanted to be? Go shoot through the clouds and go be up there. I said, yeah. And he has the controls, and he says, well, look, we can go left, we can go right, and we can go up and down. Look how amazing this is. Jarrett, welcome to flying. You're living your dream. And I calmed down, and I became excited again, and that idea has stuck with me. See, what Kirk could have said was, whoa, Jarrett, we are doing what's called in training straight and level flying. Like, the only thing more docile than what we are doing would be sitting in the plane on the ground. Like, if you're scared now, we have not practiced turns or stalls or stalling when you're kind of steep, and then this wing stalls first, and then you go like this. That's called a spin. Will scare the heck out of you. And he could have said, you're just not cut out for this. But he didn't. He used this amazing tool in the tool bag of leadership called being a dream manager and a why challenger. He brought me back to remembering my dream, remembering why I showed up. Why did I show up to do that? Because remember, when my son slingshots a rock through my window, I'm not remembering how beautiful he was when he was born and how bad I wanted him. I'm wondering how long I can shake him before somebody calls CPS on me, right? Not really. That didn't have a disclaimer. But leadership is so fascinating. I was telling this story to a client, and I love aviation. And I was telling this story to a client, and he says, but Jarrett, I don't fly airplanes. And I'm like, yes, you do. What do you do? What is your flight? What is your airplane? What are you trying to take off with? And I was working with him to get a business started. And remember, you point down the runway, full power. And what was so fascinating about having a leader like Captain Kirk was that the very things that were scaring me to death, the dips of the wing, the nose coming up and falling down, the feeling all the different turbulence that happens in a little airplane, they became the reminders that I was living my dream. It took a leader to offer a little perspective, to have me look at it this way instead of this way. See, because our perception is what we see, right? But our perspective is how we see what we see. So if you want to change what you see, you really need to change how you see what you see. Does that make sense? It's the old quote that says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So the very thing that had me absolutely convinced that I was going to die became the thing that reminded me, isn't this amazing? I'm living my dream right now. So the question becomes, what's your flight? What's your airplane? What are you trying to take off? You know, is it parenthood? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it public speaking? That can be scary. Is it starting a new business or running a business? Is it sales? And think of all the dips of the wings. All the times somebody says no, the plans that didn't work out, the things you had to redo and try again. Well, I would tell you that you can be terrified of those things and you can get scared and you can say, this is not going to work. Or those can be little reminders that you are literally in the moment living your dream. Welcome to flying. Isn't that fascinating? Now, and if we're going to talk about leadership a little bit, I got to tell you about Shirley. So I met Shirley. I volunteer in my local youth group or in my local town with a youth group and as an advisor and a counselor. And we took this group of youth into the mountains to go camping. You know, teach them skills and get them outside and interacting with each other, not playing video games. So, and I meet Shirley. Shirley's a retired grandma. You already know what she looks like. And she shows up, okay, and has dedicated her life to youth. She's dedicated her life to helping people. And so she's there to teach some skills and do some things. And she has this bag, this Mary Poppins bag that she's pulling everything out of. And I'm just watching her like, just totally shocked. What on earth is happening? And then I notice she has this little, it's not little at all. It's a big keyring thing with a bunch of bent nails on it. Nails that were just bent like this. And I'm like, so I pick it up out of her Mary Poppins bag and shake it. I mean, if there were 500 nails, I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm like, what on earth does a person need a whole bunch of bent nails for? So I pick them up and I'm like, Shirley, what is this? Like, what I'm looking at is like garbage. We've all bent a nail, we throw it away. And she's like, that reminds me of how to treat people. In my mind, right, the joke, Shirley, you can't be serious. But her name was Shirley, and she was serious. And so I kept that inside, and I was just like so fascinated. Like, what? Reminds you how to treat people. I'm like, if she starts hitting us with this thing, I'm out. Like, no more. And she says, Jarrett, people are like a bent nail. And I'm fascinated. Okay, go on. And she says, well, what would you do if you had a bent nail? I'm like, I would do this number. Watch carefully. And she goes, well, no, I said people are like a bent nail, so you can't throw it out. You can't throw people out, so you can't throw a nail out. And I'm like, okay. She says, can you use it the way that it is? I'm like, absolutely not. She goes, okay, so how would you straighten it? And I said, okay, I guess we're doing this. So I would hold it like this, and I would take a little hammer, and I would pat it on the back. I would tap it on the back and see if I can straighten it out. And then I could use it. And she goes, and that is how people are like bent nails. And I'm like, still a little bit lost. And she says, a pat on the back works much better than a hit on the head. And I was like, my mind was blown. So I repeated it. A pat on the back works much better than a hit on the head. She said, say it again. A pat on the back. I'm like, wow, this wise old lady. She just changed my life right now. So she pulls the nail off her key ring, and she gave one to me. And it's been on my key ring ever since, as a reminder that people are like bent nails. A pat on the back works much better than a hit on the head. And let me tell you something. Had a hit on the head came to me when I was up in the air, I would have never sat in an airplane ever again in my entire life. My dream would have been totally and utterly over. It took somebody like Captain Kirk that reminded me, gave me a little pat on the back. You can do this. This is not scary. In fact, this is very awesome. And I began to really open my eyes and live and really get after my dreams. So here's your takeaways. When you get pointed down that runway and you go full power, Let me tell you another thing about airplanes. Airplanes take off into the wind. They don't take off with the wind. In fact, what a good way to be pointed. If you're facing a little bit of resistance, congratulations. You're faced in the right direction. If the thing you're trying to do is giving you a little bit of resistance, I want to give you a high five right now. You're faced in the right direction. And you're going to have an opportunity to sit in the left seat like I was, and then you're going to have an opportunity to sit in the right seat. And what an honor it is to be that leader who shares a little bit of perspective that helps somebody else get off the ground. Isn't that amazing? And I have found way more fulfillment being Captain Kirk than I have found even being me learning to fly the first time. And as we be leaders who give real perspective, you'll make a difference in the world, you'll make a difference in your life, and you'll make a difference in everybody else's life. Thanks for letting me share that.